Well, welcome back to Book Sandwiched In, and this is the second review of our 2023 fall season. And today we have Mary Ann Munroe, and she'll be reviewing the book Shadow Divers, the true adventures of two Americans who risked everything to solve one of the last mysteries of World War II. And the author is Robert Kurson. Mary Ann Munroe is the School Library Systems Director for GST BOCES, overseeing the school libraries in 22 districts. She was formerly a high school librarian at Edison and Kurson High Schools. She was an office and financial manager at Park Church, and she's also a paralegal. So without any further delay.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to do the second part of your books sandwiched in, as we like to call it at lunch, right? And during banned books week. What could be better, right?
Right.
This is not a banned book. Yeah, well, it could be a banned book. It has some language. So there's a language that schools are up front, I'm going to tell you. I am Mary Ann Munroe, and I'm delighted to be here. I've served as the BOCES School Library Systems Coordinator and e-learning coordinator for the last 4 years. We have all 21 districts, so they run from Waverly all the way through Alfred Almond and Canasarega. And it's big. It's 265 square miles. We have 66 school libraries, and I only have 32 certified school librarians. I know, sad, sad face. I have 10 what we call TOSAs, Teachers on Special Assignment, who are librarians in name, but my librarians are amazing people and do some super fabulous stuff for the entire region. So a shout out to them, because without them I wouldn't be here for sure. And the other part of the equation why I'm here is very handsome husband, Michael John Munroe, who makes all the magic happen, and without him, I couldn't be here to see you today. He's my magic, so I love him dearly, and without him, this wouldn't happen either. He's super supportive, and without him, I don't know where I'd be. So he made me be the school library system coordinator. He believed in the dream when I didn't. So I just wanted to say thank you. By way of further disclosure, the handsome husband is also dyslexic, but didn't know it until we started to date. So we haven't been married a long time. Long enough that he's not sick of me yet, I'm just saying. So he was at my house one day, and he was writing a note. I'm like, I didn't know you were dyslexic. He's like, I'm not. I'm like, yes, you are. You know, I taught high school. I've seen it all, right? We've had 3 boys between us and a girl that's a reader. So I said, yeah. He said, I have a lot of trouble with comprehension. So I turned him on to audiobooks. I'm like, you need to listen, because the reading thing just isn't it, right? Yeah. So we got some audiobooks, and he's hooked. And this is kind of one of my favorites. And it's one of the, first couple I shared with you, I think, to read. I bought it. Well, I'll tell you more later. Anyway, this is available if you ever need to email me for anything. My email is on there, and again, I wasn't always a teacher. I was a paralegal for 20-some years to a small law firm. I worked at Park Church for a long time. So I've been more than an educator, and I think sometimes that lends a different perspective to the things that we purchase or put in the hands of kids in our school libraries. A little bit about the author. I just wanted you to know kind of who he is. This is straight off his website, which, by the way, was blocked by BOCES, and I had to get it unblocked. I know. What can I tell you? It is the age of blocking websites for safety reasons. Kurson was a lawyer, and he began at the Chicago Sun-Times. It's not shocking to me that he started as a sports writer, because a lot of his writing is about adventure and kind of sports. And you can see there's a real trend in his titles, right? That's that colon and additional information for you. Pirate Hunters is a very good book too. That one I've read. I have not read yet Rocket Man, but I like him. He's very direct. And I love you all. And I wouldn't be here today talking to you about fiction unless it was historical fiction. I have to tell you, I'm a real nonfiction nut. Mrs. Hoffman will tell you it's a thing for me. I know, go nonfiction, because it's a story, right? But it's a true story, and it's super, what could be better than true? So I love my historical nonfiction, I do. I am not a fantasy person. I did not read Harry Potter. It's my true confession as a librarian. I did not read Harry Potter. I'm so sorry. I know, it's a bad thing, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't watch the movie either, I can't do that. But I'm a nonfiction nut, and that's why I brought you this book today, because it's one of my favorites. Why did I pick it? Well, because, you know, I'm a geek. And when I first read this book, I thought, my high school kids, especially my high school boys, really like these kind of things, like the adventure, what can I find in my life, like where am I going? You know, because they're not sometimes all about the book, right? They're kind of more about the adventure. It had a cool picture on the cover, which I just say it makes a difference when you're a kid choosing a book in a school library. And it had the aspect for me as a librarian, research is super important in this world, right? We don't do enough of it as a society. We kind of now rely on what we see as truth, and then we just pass it on, or we just accept what's there. And the research aspect to me really spoke to me as a school librarian and as a person that likes to know things. It's not just about the find, it's about how the find happens. And without research, there would have been a discovery, but maybe not quite as meaningful. I did select this book before the title exploded, I'm just saying. So that was kind of like, I'm like, ooh, I'm so glad I picked that book down, because the world is like, ooh, look at the sub that imploded, and I'm like, there's a connection here. And it just spoke to me as a librarian, that's why I picked it. This quote that I selected for you is my own. A good story does make a good story, and all books supply a good story to the right reader. You just have to find your book. So I found this book, and I liked it. I liked it for the research aspect. Mike liked it because of the technical stuff. Like, he's a dude that can fix anything, even me. So I don't. So he understood the technical aspect, and I understood the research aspect, so it was a really great kind of couples book to read. So the author's note, the reason Robert Kurson wrote this book, and I love this quote, it's from the very first page of the book. A few years ago, a friend told me a remarkable story. 2 recreational scuba divers had recently discovered a World War II German U-boat off the New Jersey coast. Now think about that, off the New Jersey coast. I was kind of like, ooh, I want to read this book. There was a 56-man crew still aboard, and there were no records. No government, no expert, no historian, no Navy, no submarine records, no death records. Nobody knew it was there. The mystery of the U-boat, they say, is that it lay in such dark and deep waters that it could do little more than dive blind, really, diving at shadows. And it occurred to Robert then that there were shadows cast throughout the story. The fallen crewmen, the war itself, the infallibility or seeming infallibility of our history, and about the people that actually dove the dive to recover this wreck. Hence, shadow divers surfaced. Oh, but there's a pun there. Shadow divers surfaced. You should laugh. I know. There we go. I'm getting there, right? From this understanding. That's why he selected the title for this book. So it's the shadows that surround the mystery, the people, the history, and really his research, because the research was quite murky. The who of the book, and again, I put these links in the PowerPoint because I know that some of you like to explore farther, just like these guys did. Bill Nagel, or Nagley, who is here, is a troubled soul, but a great diver. in the heyday. So he was a man with a purpose. Like, he drove himself to die to depths that other people hadn't died before. He was a pioneer in the field of deep water diving. However, with glory often comes demons, and he had some of those. John Chatterton, who you see at the top, was a diver on the wreck, as was Richie Kohler, and they were the two men responsible for most of the research in determining what they had actually found. And I'm not going to link to this or show you, it's kind of a surprise, but of course, we would be remiss if we did not mention the crew aboard the submarine who still remain there. There were 56 folks that did not come back. So we want to honor their memory and make sure that we recognize them in this story, because without them, there's really no story. So Bill Nagley, remember I told you about him, right? Super good diver. Now remember, this was in the 70s and 80s. Like, diving wasn't like it is today. There were a lot of divers, but they were not deep divers. It wasn't a thing. The equipment was kind of primitive. I took this excerpt from page 3, but this is how we know the story began. Because he was alive, he was interviewed by Robert Kurson. They discussed this, and you know, when you're a fisherman, I don't know how many of you watch Deadliest Catch sometimes on Discovery. Like, yeah, I know, it's one of our favorites too. You know what they never do? They never tell anybody where they find the crab, right? It's a thing. They don't let anybody see their books. They don't let anybody see their coordinates. That's a real fisherman thing, right? Like, what you find, if you find fish, if you find whatever, you keep it secret. So Nagley met this guy who knew that he liked to find stuff. He was a deep diver. And this guy that he knew came to him and said, hey, you know, I think there's something out there. Now, why did this matter to Nagley? At the time, he was a captain on a ship, his own ship, boat actually, not a ship, smaller, that took folks out to do dives. Like, that's how he made his money. He wanted to make his living off, you know, people discovering things, kind of relive his heyday things. This guy says to him, hey, Bill, I think there's something there, I saw it. But of course, nobody gets their numbers because the guy that found it was a fisherman. And he made his living taking people out to catch fish. So once you say where something is, everybody knows, and they come, you get the fish or get the prize, right? So the guy hands Bill this crappy piece of paper with these coordinates written on it and says, I saw it with my sonar, I think there's something there. Bill says, hey, we'll check it out. Now, what I didn't tell you about him is that he drinks to excess every day. Yes. So he's having some issues, right? His business is not really great. Nagley is not what you would call warm and fuzzy. He's kind of a jerk. He swears at the people that come aboard his boat. He tells them they're awful. He picks on their dive equipment. He ridicules them for basically being out there. He tells them basically nobody is as good as me. What are you doing on here? He's kind of a jerk. But he still gets business because people know how good he used to be, right? So they trust him, and they know on his dives you find stuff. The big thing that his claim to fame is this Andrea Doria. It's a big dive. Lots of people like to do it, but it's deep. 210 feet. It's down there. But this was his first, this is where he took a lot of his clientele. They dove the Andrea Doria. It was a big cruise ship. There's a lot of artifacts. That's a thing for deep sea dive. They're not just going there and they're looking around, right? They want to get something. Either to have it personally, or because they're going to sell it, or whatever. But that's their thing, is to find the artifacts. So they go diving on Andrea Doria, which is where he meets John Chatterton. Chatterton was obsessed by the Doria. He went there multiple times. It was a dangerous wreck. I think 6 divers were killed. Searching the Andrea Doria. It's cold, it's dark, the visibility stinks. It's down there, you have to know what you're doing. But their reasoning is because they can. It's like astronauts or anybody that explores the Amazon. If you remember last year, I read you Lost City and Monkey Gods, because that's what life is about, right? Whether you're exploring big things or just here and admire little things, life is about finding the stuff you didn't know. So that's the reason they like to go, and because of the challenge. The deep sea diving, not many people are doing it, not many people are knowing about it, but when you make a big hit, it's pretty exciting. So the diving and the shipwreck thing is a thing. It's dangerous. Like, they're not called ships floating on the top. They're shipwrecks, right? They're wrecks. There's holes. There's twisted metal. There's wires. Things are down. It's not like you just go on board and walk around and it looks like you did when the passengers get on. They're mangled, a lot of them. They're in pieces. They're dangerous. They're sideways. They're upside down. They're buried in the sand. Like, you got to work for it. So these guys talk about diving a lot in this book. And I think Kurson was, I appreciate as a non-diver, like, I like to swim in the lake. But I don't know that I could do the underwater thing. I'm not sure that that would be a thing for me. So I appreciate the information in the book that he provided about diving, about the air and how it works. And that Mike was fascinated by that part of it. Like, he got a lot more out of that part than I did because he's a mechanical guy and I'm not so much. But they say you can dive and have air. It happens a lot. But I like how he worded it. It's not that they chose to die, but rather they could no longer figure out how to live. It's the narcosis, the pressure, the atmosphere that messes you up down there. So we'll hear later that somebody actually did pass away while searching for the sub, and they did have air left. There's not many deep wreck divers. They have 175 pounds a year, or at least they did when they were, it's big. It's not like you're carrying a tank and you're looking at a reef. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of stuff that goes with it. And admittedly, librarian, not so good at math or science, I like, but not so great. But I thought this was fascinating. So at every 33 feet of depth, that has 1 atmosphere of pressure. Which is, if you think about it, 33 feet is what? Maybe this and a half, right? So this and a half room, that's not that big. When you go down there, your decompression time for a 2-hour dive may be 9 hours. And that means all the way up the chain. So just think about that. So in a 2-hour dive with 9 hours of decompression, you have 11 hours worth of air that you have to account for in your life, which is a lot. So that takes that 175 pounds a year and that cold, really hard to see in atmosphere, and maybe adds to it. Maybe you have to take extra tanks. Maybe you have to change your tank over while you're down 200 and some feet. It was just fascinating to me. There's a whole, if you read the book, and I hope that you do, because I don't want to tell you all the good stuff, If you take the book and read it, that part about narcosis and what it does to somebody is really pretty interesting from a scientific and medical standpoint. And I think Kurson does a great job with that, explaining how that works and the impact of it on divers. Recreational divers, those folks that you see that are diving for coral, to see the pretty fish, not these guys, not by any stretch of the imagination. They were down as far as the Titanic was, when the sub imploded. I'm just pointing that out. The sub that they found was down as far as the Titanic, and let's think about what happened to the little Seattle. It's deep, it's far.
Like 300 feet.
Yeah, so it was close to that depth. It's big and it's far. I think the Titanic was, what, it was 50 feet more than them? Yeah, because they were at 230 feet. So it's close to where that little sub imploded depth-wise. And recreational divers, they go together, right? That's a thing for them, the buddy system. That's how they stay alive, not deep sea divers. And the explanation was fascinating. Is because if you're in the water and you have narcosis, it affects you mentally and physically. Like, you might not be able to move your joints. And if you can move your joints, you might not be able to think rationally. So the theory is, if somebody gets down there and freaks out, and you're down there together with them, now you remember how much equipment they had, right? How heavy was it? This is on. Yeah, I knew she'd know. Teachers know it. So it's heavy. So now you've got somebody else that's freaking out. And if they grab you and won't let go because they can't, or they can't like cognitively make that decision, then what's going to happen to you? They tear at your stuff. He tells stories about how sometimes they were down there and divers would grab a hold of other divers and start stabbing at them with their knives because the narcosis, the pressure created by being in those depths just made them not able to function. So that is why he says the philosophy of deep divers is one of coldly resolved independence and self-rescue. You have to know how to save yourself. So one of the things he pointed out in the book is, this is kind of a life lesson, I think. When you have a problem, you have to deal with it. Because if you ignore it, the next problem that comes along exacerbates the first problem to the point where it's probably going to kill you. So I thought that was a really great life lesson for me as an administrator of a lot of people in a lot of districts. There are days, this could be one of them this morning, I'm just saying. There are days when there's so much, and sometimes I just don't want to deal with it. But if I don't deal with the first thing that comes along, sometimes that mushrooms and creates a situation that's really untenable. And that's what his lesson in the book is. All deep divers know that if something goes wrong, you can't just say, well, fix it later and move on. You have to fix it then, or it becomes worse later. What they do is really kind of neat. So they go down pretty fast, but not real fast. Because if you go down too fast, that creates the pressure, that's its own like anti-decompression in a way. So they go down, and the first thing they have to do is tie in. So they have to have a grapple hook or something to tie themselves into the wreck so that they can hook back up to the boat so they know how to get back up. And there's decompression stops marked out on the rope that they hook to. So the tie-in can go radically wrong. Like that's a thing that cannot go well. If you don't tie in the right place, if you tie in and it comes off, and you're already down there, like that's no good because now you don't have a rope to get back up with. If you tie in, and some people have been, like it takes their equipment off, they get tangled in the line. Sometimes you tie into a piece of metal and you get stuck with a piece of metal. So the act of simply going down there and tying off creates its own, this is before you look at anything. You know, you have to make sure you're down there, you're tied in. There were no like two-way radios. It's not like they were down there at 230 feet going, hey, it's really cold down there. No, you're down there and you're down there by yourself. A lot of these guys, like, they use self-talk. So they would go down and there would be a situation, or there would be a problem, or they would find something, and they would have to convince themselves that they weren't in a state of narcosis, that this was real, or convince themselves to stop and fix it. And sometimes people couldn't do that, unfortunately. And that's kind of one of the deadly sins of being a deep sea diver. If you don't have a way to self-regulate and a strategy to get yourself out of a situation or talk yourself down, it becomes bad very quickly. There's a short time down. A lot of these trips down for them, they're only like 20 minutes. So they were only like able to explore it, and that's not very long. Like that's the amount of time I've been up here so far. Not very long at all, right? So you get 20 minutes to find out all you can about something, which to me is pretty amazing that in 20 or 25 minutes, the amount of information they brought back. And it's a long time up. Remember, 2 to 9 isn't it? So their uptime is a lot longer. So then you're just thinking about what you saw and you want to go back, and these guys are pretty motivated. What they shared in common, these two divers, well, it's maybe what they didn't share. They didn't really like each other at the beginning at all. Well, Nagley didn't really like anybody, right? Because he thought he was the best. And then Chatterton comes along and he's like, young guns, they think they know everything, right? Chatterton's earned his trust and respect. They were kind of the same philosophy. And this is the kind of same philosophy I think that he shared with Richie Kohler too. They were men of the mind. They were research and reference and reading and resources. They were the kind of people that wanted to see it, to believe it. But they didn't just go see it. Before they went to see it, they researched it at the public library. Many times at the public libraries where they went to begin their research. Because again, this is before you could Google, maybe not a bad thing. And they would start, and they would be absolutely thorough in their research, because the worst thing you can do is dive 230 feet without a plan. So they went through a lot of research. To them, diving was about exploration, aiming for the everywhere, the unknown. And to them, you were required as a person of moral fortitude to try. Like if you didn't try, how would you ever know, these guys thought. So they had some real resolve among them. They found the wreck on Labor Day of 1991. And if you want to read about the founders, there's a list. It was fascinating to me, the people that went. There weren't many of them on the boat on this first time around. But when you read their professions, like these guys weren't paid divers. So Dick Shue was 49. He was an administrator of the plasma physics lab. Kip Cochran was 41. He was a policeman. Steve Feldman was a stagehand at CBS. Paul Skavinsky was 37. He was an excavating contractor. Ron Ostrowski, we don't know much about him. Doug Roberts was 29, and he was in the cosmetics industry. Lori Garrick was 35, a research chemist. Kevin Brennan was 30, a commercial diver. John Hildeman was 27, he owned an excavation company. John Yerger was 27, he was a dive shop manager. Mark Mahone was 35, and he was a commercial diver. And Steve Lombardo was a physician. So really eclectic mix of folks that you wouldn't necessarily think would be hanging out at 230 feet looking for something at the bottom of the water, right? So I just thought that was pretty neat that from that variety of folks came this kind of discovery. But then when you look at it, it makes sense. Excavation company? Well, they would understand how things are built, like Mike does, how they work, what they're going to look like when they get twisted and tossed around, right? A policeman is going to understand people's reaction, and he's going to have training in psychology and things like that. So the physician is going to understand how bodies and how things move. So it's kind of interesting, but it's kind of like not surprising in a way that this group of men was all together. They went down, and they found a hatch. So you're thinking, yeah, so what? Hatch on a lot of stuff. Well, if it were a barge, it wouldn't have had a hatch. So that was their first clue. And they knew that because of research. They had studied about, like, they were just studied men on their own, not necessarily college people, right? But these were people that just loved to read and find things out and read nonfiction and look at schematics and drawings and things like that. So they knew that if it had a hatch, it couldn't possibly be a barge. So it's not a ship, it's something else. And as they explored, they found fins, pillars, cigar body, a torpedo. This is a submarine. They found a submarine. And they found a World War II U-boat. And they were super excited, like this was a thing. Nobody knew what was there. Nobody had ever found anything like this before. You remember where they were. They were in Jersey, okay? It's highly unusual to find a U-boat outside of New Jersey. But then, they get back up, they can't go back. The weather was crappy for that first dive. Chatterton talks about losing a lot of air just trying to get to the rope, to get like down to the dive site. And they have to go. They can't stay, right? They take their divers, they go, they can't stay. The thing about it is, somebody always knows something. So they made a pact. You remember making those pacts when you were little, right? You're like, I can't swear. That's it, right? How long do you think that lasted? 2 hours. When they got back, it lasted about 2 hours before somebody called somebody and said, you'll never guess what we found, because they didn't want to tell anybody. This guy here, there's not much in the book about him by Linda, but he's the competition. He doesn't like Nate at all. He is not a fan. They have words, they have fights, they're super competitive with each other. He calls Nagley a drunk. Nagley calls him lots of F words. Did I mention there was a adult language in the book? I'm just putting it out there. Says he's terrible, but they're afraid that he's going to get the coordinates, and they don't want him to take credit because what do they know? They know it's not a barge, and they know it's a submarine, and they think it's a World War II U-boat. But as soon as somebody else has the coordinates, then they can go and find out what it really is, and then that will be their claim to fame. And honestly, some of them were about knowing, some of them were about the artifacts. You remember, because that's a lucrative aspect of deep diving. So, a little bit about who the divers are. Chatterton, his dad was Yale educated. He was an aerospace engineer, and he invented the Baromatic, which is this thing I think we know now as like the soda machines. Oh, like how you can, you know, when you go, which restaurant is that? You can pick the different flavor soda, and it all comes out of one machine. Yeah. So you can pick whatever flavor. Yeah. His dad invented that, like, so the soda could all come out of one machine, but you could get different flavors. His mom was a former model, but his dad was a jerk. He drank, he was mean, he was not a nice guy to live with. They talked about he was smoking like 4 packs of 10 cigarettes a day. It was crazy. So mom eventually left and took Chatterton with him. And his role model was really his grandfather, who was a retired rear admiral and a Navy hero, and he really looked up to this guy. In 1970, he enlisted in the Army. Why not the Navy, like his grandpa? Because he didn't want anybody to call in a favor. So he decided on the Army. Remember, these guys are super independent, super independent folks. So he was an Army medic. He was stationed in Japan. He had a pretty cushy job, pretty good job as a medic. But he decided that wasn't enough. He wanted to know why. And he said, I listened to people, but all I got were political statements about why or why not or whose fault. He wanted to know why. So he asked for a transfer to the field. I know, in Vietnam, who would do that? Well, Mr. Chatterton did that, and it was an experience for him. I'll let you read about that, but he was, I don't know how to word this without swearing, and I don't want to do that on the thing, but they called him a crazy MF because he would go get people when nobody else would. And he said there were some truths that he said he had discovered as this medic in the field about people, kind of about how he thought people lived their life, and maybe kind of about how he thought life should be lived. If an undertaking was easy, someone else would have already done it. If you follow in another's footsteps, you miss the problems really worth solving. Excellence is born of preparation, dedication, focus, and tenacity. Compromise on any of these and you become just average. Every so often, life presents a great moment of decision, an intersection at which a man must decide to stop or go. A person lives with these decisions forever. Examine everything, not all is as it seems or as people tell you. It is easiest to live with a decision if it is based on an earnest sense of right and wrong. The guy who gets killed is often the guy who got nervous. The guy who doesn't care anymore, who has said, I'm already dead, the fact that I live or die is irrelevant, and the only thing that matters is the accounting I give of myself, is the most formidable force in the world. The worst possible decision is to give up. And, I bought this book for my kids when I was at Edison. And my true confession is, that was before the world is like it is today. When I bought that book for my kids to read, it wasn't like this. The political divide among people was not as wide as it is now. There was a sense of respect and civility, even in disagreement. I have to say, even all these years later, I hope that my kids still read that section of the book and really make it speak to them. Because some of those truths are really our truths as humankind, as a nation of global people that live together and rely on each other for kindness and compassion, as people that need to be more tenacious and need to learn to stick with it. If I could refer you to any section in the book, I would say read those 2 pages and just let it sink in what was written in 2005 and what happens today. Maybe Chatterton was right. Maybe that is our lesson from the book. Maybe it's not what he found. Maybe the words he thought to live by become our words. Anyway, that was my soapbox about that. So he gets out of the Army, and like a lot of our Vietnam veterans, he had what we call today post-traumatic stress disorder. What they called then, oh, that guy's been in Vietnam, you don't want to talk to him. Because I'm old enough to say, as a kid from the 70s, maybe a little before that, 29. He thinks I'm 29, I don't want to burst his bubble. He came out of the Army and was messed up. His mom helped him kind of dig himself out of it. He was a scout fisherman, which he really loved. He signed up to become a computer programmer, woke up in the middle of the night, and the day that he was supposed to go to college, supposed to start college, on the GI Bill, and he's like, I can't do this. And he decided to be a commercial diver. Like, that takes some, as they say in the Hebrew community, some chutzpah. Like, that's a big decision to make. Like, he had signed up, he was going. And then he's like, not going to do this, right? So now, what does he do? Well, he dives in the city, and he fixes things underwater. And he becomes so good at it that, and he's so good mechanically, he reminds me a lot of Mike, because like, I had to help him fix a car once when he was hurt. It was beyond the scope of my comprehension. But he could go down and with his eyes closed, he could tell if a piece of metal was burned or if it was not by by the waves that it gave off when he touched it with his knife. It's just that like connection with the world around us. Like he really wanted to know stuff. Aren't people like that super cool? I know. So that's a little bit about who he is. Richie Kohler, a little bit different. So John Chatterton, he wanted to discover stuff because he thought it was cool. Richie Kohler, he wanted to discover stuff because he wanted stuff. So kind of different. They hated each other for a long time, believe it or not. Ended up being really great partners. Richie's dad ran a glass business. His mom was Sicilian, stay at home. His dad was tough, not very nice. Things went wrong. He said things like, "How could you be so stupid? What's wrong with you? Are you dumb?" So dad was rough for him. His parents divorced. He joined the Navy, and they threw him out. Richie, as you might kind of imagine, was kind of forced in high school. And they got mad at some older kids, and I believe that they went in the gym locker room and set their clothes on fire while they were dressed for gym. Sounds like something a teenager, a rebellious teenager would do. And he got in trouble, and they pressed charges, and the judge said, "Listen, behave yourself until you graduate. I'll expunge this." Well, apparently, that didn't happen. So he enlisted. He was so excited because they were going to take him in, and he was going to work on like naval things and ships and airplanes. And no, one day. So then he went back to work for his dad at the glass company. And artifacts were his jam, as my kids would say. They were his jam. Like they're the things he was after. He wasn't after knowledge was great. Stuff was better. So I get that, but they were kind of two disparate souls. But they shared this. The commonality between these people is that they were readers. They read what they wanted to without censorship. And as I stand here today during Dan Books Week, I think, what if Richie Kohler, at age 13, had gone to his public library and gone upstairs and taken out the schematics of a book on U-boats from World War II, from the adult section, and the librarian had said to him, "You can't take that out. You're not old enough." That didn't happen then. You can't take that out. That's not okay for you. You can't take that out because you can't read it. None of them, that did not happen to these folks. They were readers who were supported by the institutions around them that allowed them to freely access material based on what they wanted to look at. So to me, that speaks volumes about what our public libraries have done for many, many years and will continue to do for many years for society. Because without those institutions, there would have been no research. Because these books sure weren't in their public high schools. They didn't go to college. They just went and got books. They bought them from bookstores, they went to the public library, but they loved to read. So, isn't that super cool as we stand here in the library? They were of German heritage, so that was a big thing to them when they found the U-boat. They had felt a real connection to their German relatives and culture. They loved reading. Oh, we know that. Hold it. Let me take that in. We can tell that. No. We'll discuss it. They loved to explore and learn. And I think most of all, they had the ability to see beyond what is to what might be. And I have to say, I think that Mike gave me that gift too. And I might not have known about that. My first marriage was not a pretty thing, and it lasted a long time, not in a good way, Mrs. Hoffman will tell you. And if he hadn't had a chance to see beyond what I was after that, and what it could be, he wouldn't be here with me today. So that's a really powerful statement to me. is that these people can see beyond what is to what could be. It took 6 years to research. So in the meantime, they didn't know the number of the U-boat, they didn't know where it came from, why was it there, what was it doing, right? So they didn't have a number. U-boats always have a number, like U-172. This one they called Yoo-hoo. Yoo-hoo. I know, it's funny. They called it Yoo-hoo because they didn't know what the number was. It took 6 years. So they started in 1991. In 1997, they finally discovered what it was. And a knife. Chatterton came up one day with a knife with a name carved in it. This is the secret to success. I'm not going to disclose this because this would ruin the surprise. But the name on the knife matched the name on a roster. And it said that the shipman's name and that he had been killed, but not in New Jersey, and not at the time that the U-boat went down. So I'm going to leave it there. A lot of guys, they travel. Dude, he got in a plane and he went to like Germany and met with people and experts, and people met with him. He went to the government. Like, can you imagine? Can I have your records about U-boats? Like today, that probably wouldn't happen. People met with him because this discovery was huge. So the first person he met with in the government said, well, I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you nothing. Super secret. But the guy said, okay, well, I won't take pictures or write anything down, but can you tell it to me orally? And they're like, there's no wreck there. You're nuts. Those coordinates are wrong. He's like, no, they're not, because I was there. And he said, there's no wreck there. I think they're like, yes, there is. So the government actually helped them. The Navy was going to help them, but they couldn't because at that time there was some kind of legal suit going on, and they couldn't actually provide them help technically, but they allowed him access to the archives. It was like 43, I don't know, it was some ridiculous amount of stories of paperwork. So he was in the archives, he traveled, he talked to experts about U-boats, anybody that they could imagine. The secret to telling where this U-boat came from and what it was, that none of the tags were good. So there's like lots of tags, I guess, above, like portals and torpedo bays that should have normally told you, like, this is a sub number. But because they were so late into World War II, the tags that they used usually were brass. But in this case, they weren't brass. They used cheaper metals. And so being down there all that time, they disintegrated. So there were none of the usual markers. They picked up boots because a lot of times the service people on the U-boats wrote their names in their boots. The book talks a lot about what it's like to live in a submarine. Not a thing I would want to do. They don't bathe. They don't wash. The toilet facilities, they used to torpedo their poo because like it would get full, so they would put it in the torpedo thing and blow it out. Like they stunk. It was nasty. It was small. It was little. It was not great living conditions. So they didn't have a lot. Like they had one pair of underwear for 6 months down. I know. So yeah, there it is. But the spare parts boxes, some other person that had found a tag on another U-boat, another wreck someplace, said, look on the spare parts boxes. That's where I found this tag because when the spare parts boxes get transferred, you have to know which the submarine goes with. There are different kinds. Yeah, this is the Mike thing, not a Marianne thing. I'm telling you, the research was fascinating. So they would go and they would just narrow this down. They thought it was this and they thought it was that, and they would speculate and they were sure they were right and then they were absolutely wrong, and they would measure. So like if it was this kind of U-boat, it should have been this long, and then they measured it like, no, that can't be it. If it was this kind, it would have like this kind of machine gun thing, and then they went down like, nope, that's not there. And then they just did all this research and it would be so promising, and then they would get deflated, right? It was the spare parts box. They were really pretty sure they had the right sub, but it was the spare parts box that confirmed it. And again, on page 191 it says, if one did not accept written history as gospel, worlds of possibility open. Because history all said that something else happened to the sub. It didn't say it was hanging out off the coast of New Jersey at all. So they just didn't, it wasn't that they didn't accept what was there, they used what was there and built on it, I think, is a better way to put it. It was the U-869, was the U-boat's designation. It was supposed to have been sunk off the coast of Gibraltar, clearly not so much, since it was in New Jersey. And they found this out, like they finally determined it. They intercepted radio messages, like pretty cool. So they actually listened to the intercepted messages, and the only reason they had access to those is because the government was helping them, not helping them, which was pretty neat. The commander of the sub was Munroe. 56 members of the crew. Of the 56 members, 24 of them were teenagers. The youngest one was 17. And they were there, they were in there. It was hit a couple, 3 times, but I have to say, even though Richie Kohler was all about the artifacts, the one thing that he and Chatterton agreed upon is that the remains had to remain where they were. It's a war grave. It's a thing of reverence and a thing to remember a terrible time in our history where people died because other people encouraged meanness. So they really wanted to keep it sacrosanct and not, you know, at one point he picked up something he thought was a bull and it was a human skull. And I remember him saying in the book that he apologized and said, "I'm really sorry, I didn't mean." And the other guy picked up something that he thought was like a shirt and there was a piece of femur in it. And I remember distinctly in the book them saying the femur, the strongest bone in the body, and him saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll put it back. So they didn't pick, they could have probably figured out the mystery sooner, because you figure where all the dead bones are personal effects, like journals or names or medals or tags, right? But they didn't disturb any of that intentionally, because they wanted to, it's a war grave to them, which I thought was really an amazing decision to make by all those people. And divers changed. It wasn't just always them. There were a lot of divers that died. People did died in the wreck. 3 of them. Steve Feldman was one, and Chris and Chrissy Roos were the other 2. They were a father and son team. Remember what I said about all that equipment and somebody like freaking out? Yeah, the last dive is about the Rooses, if you want to read that. That's an excellent book too. And the proof? So the proof. I want to read you that section so badly. I marked it with purple tags. And I'm like, I'm going to read this, but I'm not. Because you will have to read that, right? So Chatterton found the proof. I told you what it was on. It was on those boxes of spare parts. But they had to do some maneuvering to get there because it was the one spot on the sub they couldn't get to where the boxes were. So they had to like rig it up so they could get into it. Then when they did get into it, a beam fell on him. I know. Then there were more dives and more video. Then he went down with a sledgehammer to try and get stuff loose, and then he thought he was going to hit a pipe, but the pipe wasn't really a pipe, it was an oxygen tank. And he had to actually hit it on the head. And before this, he had taken one of the breathing apparatus that the sailors used back up to the surface because they thought it might have numbers on it. And it had the oxygen tank, and he didn't think anything out of it. And it blew up his garage. So all his artifacts from the Andrea Doria were in there. And so he is well aware that if he hits this thing on the top of it, it could blow the sub, him, and everything else to smithereens, and he did it anyway. Which is, I don't know, crazy, in a way, crazy. And then he got strangled on the way out by wires, loose wires. It was, I know, you gotta read that part, it's the best part. And we don't really know, like, why was that there? We can speculate that the commander was kind of a zealot, and he got hit a couple times. They think he got hit once and survived, and then was like, I'm going to get those Americans, and was like on a mission, and then got hit again by a French ship. And that's what you don't really know, because, again, they say that the ship really went down in Gibraltar. And we don't really know what happened. Again, we can only speculate. I did give you some book study questions if you want to provide the book study questions to a group, or just things to think about as you read the book. I think probably this is the fairest question. It was a German U-boat. I mean, they were sent there to kill Americans. Do you think the book treated them too kindly? My response to that is no. If you're a soldier, you're a soldier. What was that quote that somebody said the other night on TV? When you go in the service, they teach you to be a soldier, not a human being. So I think that's a very telling statement from somebody that's enlisted, and from the perspective of somebody that's not. You know, my dad served in the Navy, my grandpa was in the Navy, my grandfather was in the Army. So, we do have a strong service history, I completely understand this, but I am a librarian. So, I'm not all about hurting somebody either. The war thing to me is just inane. I just don't understand how we can be so cruel to each other. However, I do think that the treatment in the book about why they could have known a lot sooner, right? They could have gone, I'm sure somebody had dog tags, I'm sure there was a journal, but they chose intentionally not to do that. And I think that shows the respect that all of us have for anybody that follows a leader and in the sake of their country and what they truly believe in their heart at the time, or were forced to do, one or the other. They do, they're maybe the wrong move for the right reasons, I guess. So that's my take on that. And it was an awesome book. It was a good read, and I have to tell you. So you know that story that you always told, that you lost a library book, and so the dog got this book from beside the couch. I'm on a Zoom, I'm doing a meeting, and I'm looking down, and I said to the girl I was on the phone with, Stacy Harris from the Teacher Center, I'm like, ooh, you want to see that dog? She looks really guilty. Well, she pulled it down between her feet so I couldn't see what she was doing, and she ate the back of the book and my highlighter. I'm like, whoa, she never does she? She never does anything like that. So I went to see one of my other librarians, and I'm like, oh, she devoured that book. So for Ellie, I hope that you all devour the book just like she did. But please don't spit it out on your living room floor, because that requires the mama and the papa to clean up after you. And I hope you love it as much as I did. Enjoy the read or the listen. In this case, the listen was the reader was very good. And I just want you to know that if you have kiddos or grandkiddos in any of the districts in GST, they all have access to Sora. I spend upwards of $100 and some thousand a year placing books in Sora, which is our and audiobook platform. It's much like Libby at the public library end, but Sora is our app for kids. So they do have access to books with bad words like this one. Thank you very much, because I put that in there. But they also have some really great read-alongs, everything from littles, from pre-K to professional development stuff I put in there, so that your kids can read along with you. So if you have grandkids in high school that you would like to read the book with, I think that would be an awesome thing to do. You can read, they can read the ebook or listen to the audiobook, and I try very hard to make it a broad and diverse collection that speaks to everyone. So there's lots of Dog Man. There's 87 holds. I don't know how many copies I have, but there's still 87 holds. I know, it's killing me. There's lots of Dog Man, but there's lots of other good stuff too for readers like all of us. Whatever your jam is, whether it's Harry Potter or whether it's Shadow Divers, I try to put something out there for everybody. And from my heart to yours, thank you for supporting your public library and being here today. It was an amazing experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. Thank you.
I just want to mention, I had forgotten about this book. I read it probably 20 or 25 years ago.
It's an awesome book.
Yes, and also the other book one of the other books by the same author, Crashing Through. Have you read that?
I did not
It
read
is
that one.
marvelous about a blind boy
That's
whose
blind.
mother allows him to do anything. Doesn't stop him from riding his bicycle along the edge of the road into town, and of course he crashes through things all the time. And he comes to a point in life where he can decide to have surgery to restore some of his sight that's very dangerous and everything. It's an excellent book.
Ooh, I love it.
And I've read about 5 or 6 books about Sunday Sutherland, so
He's
it's
a
an
great
interest
writer.
of mine.
It reads like, if you didn't know it was true, it reads like a fiction book. That's the best part. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Why did they name the high school after Thomas Edison?
I'm not sure. You know, the middle school and the elementary are Cohen, Nathaniel Cohen. I don't know why it's Edison.
My cousin.
Really? That's super weird. You should read an Edison book. That one I don't know. Well, one of my favorite supervisions, by the way. The kids were great. I miss my kids. I won't cry, I promise. Maybe. Not sure. Other questions?
Well, thank you
You're
very, very
welcome.
much.